The midday sun pressed heavily over the Marine Corps training range, baking the dirt into a cracked, dusty canvas and turning the air into a shimmering haze. Rows of young snipers in training stood tense behind their rifles, sweat trickling beneath their gear as they struggled through another frustrating round of missed shots. Their targets' simple paper silhouettes pinned 600 yards out remained untouched in all the places that mattered. Each failed attempt deepened the silence, broken only by muttered curses, clanking bolts, and the dry scrape of boots shifting in the dirt. Gunnery Sergeant Miller, a man whose voice could rattle window panes, finally exploded. His roar thundered across the range. Is this some kind of joke? Every Marine snapped tighter, bracing for impact. They weren't used to seeing him this furious, not because they had made mistakes, but because the entire unit seemed cursed with the same inability to hit anything today. Their shots drifted left, then right, then low, no matter how many times they adjusted their sights or recalibrated their breathing. It was as if the wind itself was mocking them, but Miller wasn't yelling at his Marines, not this time. His glare was fixed on a solitary figure standing quietly behind the firing line. The old man had wandered in earlier, unnoticed at first, moving with a calm stillness that contrasted sharply with the restless tension of the range. He stood with his hands behind his back, posture straight despite his age, eyes observing everything with the slow, deliberate focus of someone who understood more than he let on. Do you even know where you are, old man? Miller barked, stomping toward him. The young Marines turned their heads, some smirking, others watching with curiosity. To them, he looked like any other retiree, thin white hair, sun-weathered skin, clothes that had seen better years. Nothing about him suggested authority, much less expertise. But when he met Miller's stare, his eyes held steady. There was no fear in them, only a quiet patience. Dean Peters, 82 years old, didn't answer the insult. Instead, he looked back toward the targets, then at the rifles the Marines were fighting with. His gaze drifted across the field, following the unpredictable curl of the wind, listening to the subtle whistle that swept along the hills. He watched the way the Marines positioned their shoulders, how they pressed too hard into their rifles, how their breathing fought against their own movements. Finally, in a calm voice that carried no aggression, he said, "They're fighting the wind instead of working with it." Some Marines exchanged mocking grins. A few rolled their eyes. One whispered under his breath, "Here we go." Another old-timer who thinks he can still shoot. But Miller didn't smile. His jaw tightened, fueled by embarrassment and irritation. The last thing he wanted was an outsider, much less a fragile-looking senior citizen, commenting on his unit's performance. "What makes you think you know anything about Marine sniping?" Miller growled. Dean didn't snap back. He simply stepped forward, slow but steady, and pointed toward the distant ridge. "See the gust pattern? It bends left at the top of the valley and drops right before reaching your targets. You're adjusting for surface wind only. That's why your rounds keep drifting." His words stunned a few Marines, not because they understood, but because he'd noticed something they hadn't. Miller scoffed. "And you think you can do better?" The old man gave a small shrug. "If you'll hand me a rifle, I'll show you." A wave of suppressed laughter rippled through the group. One Marine whispered, "He'll break his shoulder." Another muttered, "This is gonna be good." But curiosity lingered too. Something about Dean's confidence felt different. Calm, practiced, earned. Miller hesitated, torn between dismissing him and proving him wrong. Finally, with a sharp exhale, he grabbed a rifle and shoved it toward the old man. "Han. Show us." Dean accepted the weapon carefully but without struggle. His hands, though aged, moved with surprising precision as he checked the chamber, adjusted the sling, and lowered himself into a stable kneeling position. The Marines fell silent. There was something deeply familiar in the way he handled the rifle, something disciplined, something refined. He adjusted the scope by barely a fraction of an inch, settled his cheek against the stock, and exhaled long and slow. Then he fired. The shot cracked across the field, sharp and clean. Seconds later, the spotter called out, stunned, "Bullseye." Murmurs erupted. A few Marines blinked in disbelief. Dean fired again. Another perfect impact. Then a third, same result. And with each shot, the skepticism in the young Marines drained away, replaced by awe. The old man wasn't guessing. He wasn't lucky. He knew exactly what he was doing. The range fell completely silent as Dean slowly rose to his feet, handing the rifle back to Miller. The gunnery sergeant took it, no longer with arrogance but with a dawning sense of respect. How did you do that?" One Marine finally asked. Dean answered gently, "You're all skilled shooters. You just forgot the fundamentals that matter most, the things time can't change. Wind reading. Patience. Breathing. Trusting the rifle instead of forcing it. You train hard, but you're trying to control every variable when you should be learning to understand them. Miller stepped closer, his earlier anger melting away. Who are you, sir? Dean hesitated, as if the answer wasn't important. But after a long breath, he finally said, I served a long time ago. Back when sniper doctrine was still being shaped. Back when everything you're doing now was being tested for the first time. That's when it clicked. The stories whispered across old barracks. The name etched into history books that new Marines skimmed but didn't truly absorb. Dean Peters wasn't just a veteran, he was one of the original architects of the shooting techniques they were struggling to master. A hush fell over the unit. Without being asked, Dean spent the next hour guiding the young Marines one by one. He corrected their grip, grounded their stances, taught them to feel the wind through their clothes instead of guessing. Under his calm guidance, their shots tightened, drifting less, landing closer to center. Confidence returned, not from ego but from understanding. By the end of training, the Marines looked at him not as a stranger, but as a mentor they wished they'd had sooner. Miller walked up to Dean, his voice steady and sincere. Sir, thank you. We needed that lesson more than we knew. Dean simply nodded. Every shooter improves, but only when he's willing to listen. As he walked away from the firing line, the young Marines watched in respectful silence, realizing how close they had come to dismissing a legend. The frustration of the morning had transformed into something far more valuable, a reminder that skill does not fade with age, and wisdom can arrive in unexpected, humble forms. And long after Dean had gone, the Marines continued firing, each shot sharper, cleaner, steadier, carrying with them the lesson of the old man they almost overlooked.